Okay, welcome to this lesson where we're going to create a form, and the form's purpose is to collect a person's name, their email, and also a checkbox to specify whether or not they want to receive a newsletter, and then finally a submit button. So that's three different form elements, and that's going to be two text fields, also a checkbox, and finally a actual button for submitting. So here we have just a basic skeleton user interface, and we're going to put a form right here, and we're going to also put all the various states of these three different form elements and put them in components with variants as well. So we have a lot of work to do. It's really fun once you start to get the idea of accurately prototyping all of this stuff, and you get to see it become a reality when you hit the play button and actually get to interact with it. So what we're going to do here first is all labels need to have, or all forms rather, they need to have a heading of some sort to inform the user what this section's about. So we're going to put in just a piece of type here, and I'm going to put in submit your details. Now we can't see it because it's white, so we're going to go ahead and make this black. All right, and where I'm going to choose to align this is not to the very edge right here. If you can zoom up, you can see it's a very soft white. There's not much contrast. I'm not going to put it there. I'm going to put it right along the side here. So the best way to do that, again, would be to hit Shift R, drag out a ruler, and make sure both of these elements are right up against it. All right, that's great. Okay, so right here, I think that's pretty good position. We can always adjust things afterwards. We Shift R to get rid of that again. And now we're going to go ahead and design the first form element, which is going to be collecting the user's name. All right, so we'll go ahead and take our type tool, left click, and we're going to put in name. All right, so let's go ahead. We'll make that black as well. And what's the issue now? We don't want to have a name field, a label, a form label, be as big as the actual form title. So that's the issue of visual hierarchy. We're going to scale that down in order to really increase that visual hierarchy or that separation. So I would say roughly around 18 for the size would work pretty well. And we have enough of a distinction where these two fields, our eyes are clearly drawn towards this heading right here. Now let's go ahead and then take the rectangle tool, and then we will, by the way, it's probably worth it to get our rulers out, so Shift R. And we're just going to drag out a field, maybe right around this size or so. Remember, you don't want to have a field too small, and you also don't want to have a field that's too large based on the type that's going to be inside of it. So what we can do now is Shift R to get rid of those. And we have to make a determination. What color do we want this background to be? Well, first of all, here's a design tip. This background is not gray. It's actually, it has let's click on this here so I can get access. Oh, I think right now it is. Oh, it's because it is locked. Sorry about that. I'm going to move all those things inside of there. All right. So this right here, this artboard or this frame has a color here, and it's not gray. It's very light, as you can see, but it has a little bit of this green hue in it. All right, so you don't want to use, in a context of like a light hued background color like this, you don't want to use a gray. It just doesn't look good at all. So what we want to do is we'll grab this background color, and now it's the same exact color as the background. And you could come down here, maybe make it a little bit like that if you wish, or you can make it white. But now this obviously does not contrast hardly at all, so let's use a stroke. So for the stroke, you could just leave it black, or you can do the same approach where we take the eyedropper, we get this color, and then we pull it down somewhere in this the darker area, because you definitely want to make sure it And we can come right near the center, and that way we can get more of the color in there. So this to me looks pretty good. So we also have to make the determination if we want to have rounded corners. So if we zoom up enough by holding Control on the mouse scroll wheel, we can see these little dots. We can pull them in. Let's just go with 5 or so, and that value is right up here. All right, so that looks good. So let's say this is how we want the form element itself to look, and here's where it's starting to get important to start using good practice in terms of adding your styles. And so we can see we have 2 different sections where it has a fill and a stroke. We also see the little styles icon on both of them. So you can add your stroke and your stroke width and your stroke styles essentially over here. So we click on it, hit plus, and then we can give this a suitable name that's relevant based on what's happening here. So we can add the name. We can just call this right here default stroke. Just create the style, and now we'll have the ability to reuse that and in a single area change it, and it will change across all instances of this future component. We also can add this white right here, so we can go ahead and hit this and then hit plus, and we'll say form background. We'll create that style. All right, great. So let's also make a consideration about an error state. So one thing that's important to always design for so that your developers, your front-end developers will know what it looks like is an actual error state on top of a focus state as well. So we're gonna do those 3 things. So when what we'll do is we'll design for the error state right now, and then we'll do the focus state once we get to the variance section. Because the focus state, I'm planning on just taking the stroke and increasing it from 1 to 3 pixels. That's the only difference. In fact, this is what that will look like. So when somebody clicks into it, it's just going to make it much bolder. By much, it's only 2 pixels, but there is a big difference if we go from that to this. Now, when it comes to the error state, we're going to add some information in an icon down here. And then we will also change the color of this outline here to red. That way we have plenty of visual cues to let a person know that there is an issue with the information that has either not been entered or has been entered but incorrectly into this particular form element. So let's go ahead and right click. We'll go to plugins and Iconify. Make sure to install that by going to browse plugins. If you don't see it, it is free. And then we will just type in warning, and I'm going to take this one right here, drag it on. Sometimes they're real big. That's okay. Just hold Shift Alt, left click and drag, and make sure you don't flip it upside down. There we go. And we're going to put it right here. Now size is real important. You really don't want this icon to be this big, simply because it competes for too much attention, visual hierarchy, for the name field. So before we scale it down, let's go ahead and actually let me lock that group right here. There we go. Oh, that is inside of there. Sometimes I'm gonna leave things like this in when things get screwed up so I can show you how to fix it. This is inside of that group where I didn't want it to be, so I'm gonna drag it out, and now it's there, and now we can't select the rest of this stuff because we don't want to change that. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're just gonna click right somewhere next to it. It's okay if it's not in the correct position initially, and I'm going to put in, sorry, you have entered incorrect data. Just something generic like that will work just fine. Now, of course, we don't want it to be the same size as our headline, clearly, so we need to scale this down a lot. So let's go to 18, and you probably don't even want it to be the same size as your name, and you certainly don't want it to be as bold. So what we can do is we can take this down to regular, and then we can come down to around 16, and that's a lot better. We could probably scale this down just a little bit more, and we'll also make both of these red. So remembering that we really want to stick with what makes sense in terms of reusing and adding these things to styles. So we're going to make the fill red, and then we're going to add this right here, and we're just going to call this error. We'll just call it error. That's fine right there for the color. And then we will choose this and choose error as well. Now, also when it is in the error state, this will also change from default stroke to error, but we'll do that when we get to the actual variance section. So we want to make sure everything's pretty much positioned how we want it at this point. And now we can go ahead and we can take these elements here. Let's first group these up. So Control G by selecting both. And now we have 3 elements. We have our name, our rectangle right here. We can also rename that from rectangle 12 to text field by double clicking into it. And then we have this element. So now what we can do is we can right click, and we're going to create an auto layout to this, and this will become important in the future, and you'll see how. And then finally we can right click, we're going to create a component, and then we're going to come over to variants, and we're going to click plus, and now we've created the variant from it. So let's drag it over here. This time it's a little hard to see what it looks like on this background, so let's go ahead and just take a frame, and we're just going to wrap a frame around it, and we'll give the same frame the same background color. So the background color over here hasn't been added to the styles, so let's click plus, and we'll choose background, and then we can come back here, we can click this and then choose background. This will be the default state, and it's named default by default over here, as you can see in property 1. And for the default state, of course, we don't want to show the error. So we'll double click into this, and right here under the layer section, we're going to click this eye icon. All right, so now when we click back into it, it's just selecting this portion. The next state, let's go ahead and duplicate this, and let's move this down actually. So let's move things around a little bit, and I'm going to pull this down. We'll take this element and, well, let's take this top one and just push this over here. This will be the focus state, like I mentioned, so we're going to double click into it, change this to focus, and then double click into the form element itself, and we'll change this default stroke here up to 3. And there we go. And that's good. And then also we'll go ahead and make this one, we'll change the default stroke to error. And you could also choose to change the name to error as well. I'm not going to choose to do that. I think these two right here would be more than sufficient for appropriately identifying and communicating to the user which form element has been incorrect. So right here, we're going to double click into it and change this to error. And that looks pretty good right there. If you wish, you could add a hover state to this as well, but for now, I'm just going to leave it as is right here. So in this little frame right here, we can also give this a label, and we can just kind of name these, although it's kind of self-explanatory what's happening, but we can put text fields. These aren't used in the prototypes themselves. This is just an area for us to see our different components and such. All right, so what we'll do now is we're going to go to prototype, and then we'll double click into this default. And so when somebody clicks into this, so on click is the type that we're going to use, we want it to change to our focus right here, and that will work well. And then we have to find a way to figure out how to show an error state. It's a little tricky depending on how you've structured your form and how you laid it out, and you'll see what I mean. But what we'll do is on the focus state, we'll drag a connection here, and then we'll just use a key. So when somebody, if you click where it says click to select and hit the whichever key you want to activate this, hit enter. So mine will be the enter key. And when somebody clicks enter while this is selected, it will take them to the error state. And then maybe if they click escape or enter again, you would have to communicate this information to the stakeholders who are making the decisions about your design. It will take it back to the original state. So we'll change this to keypad, and maybe we'll just hit escape. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a shot here. And in our assets, it's frame 2 right here. You might want to rename frame 2 to components. All right, and then we'll come back here and we will drag. Notice this says frame 1. That's also not ideal either. So if we go back here, we'll change this to text fields. All right, so come back, we'll drag this on, and here's our first text field. So let's go ahead and click play, and we'll see what happens. So somebody clicks into it. We showed the hover state, or not the hover state rather, except what I mean by that is the focus state, and then we'll hit enter. There we go, and then we'll hit escape just to get out of there. All right, so now we're going to put in the email form as well, or field rather. We'll duplicate this, Control D, we'll drag it down, and we're gonna double click to change this to email. And that's looking pretty good right there. Email is one of those fields you also don't need to add a placeholder value. People pretty much typically know it's whatever at whatever .com, .net, or .org. So that's pretty good right there. Now, here's one of the problems that I mentioned when it comes to prototyping this particular, the error state. So if we go back to this and I hit enter, notice how close it is to this. There's not enough white space. Now you could try to account for that by pushing this down, but now there's too much white space in my opinion. While it looks good here, when that error state is not there, there's just too much white space between these two elements. What could work if you wanted to accurately, or not accurately, but if you wanted to demonstrate what this might look like, you could put it to the side, and that's fine, but then again, it kind of breaks the layout. So what I would suggest doing is one of two things. You can create a more elaborate prototype where you have different frames that simulate just that, the entire form as a part of a frame, and then in one frame you have this changed, by the way, or to like, let's see here, you have it changed to the error state, and then you can create an on click and it will naturally push things down. What you can do is we can take both of these elements and we can right click and choose auto layout. So that way, if you want to change this to an error, it will naturally push this down as you would want it to, or as you would expect it to. So, however, even doing that, it still doesn't move it down once in prototype. So perhaps that's something that they will address in the future. All right, great. So now let's go ahead and do an actual, let's do a checkbox down here. All right, so for the checkbox, if you recall, it is just typically it's a square. So we're gonna take the rectangle tool, we can hold shift, and the size of the checkbox obviously is pretty important. It needs to be big enough for people to easily click on it, especially tap with their finger, but not so big that it throws off the flow of the design. So what we'll do here is we're going to choose to add the fill, which is the form background color, and then also the stroke, which is the default stroke. And also notice how we have rounded corners here. You want to have that same sort of aesthetic applied to your other form elements as well. So they were 5, and that would work fine, but I think because this is such a smaller square essentially, we can probably get away with making that 3, and it still works just as well. All right, so we'll say that this is the default state. Now we're going to create a component that also has an interactive component and variant to it, but first we need to get all the layers that we're going to be using before we get to that stage. So let's go back here to our layers, and this time we're going to use the pen tool for the first time. So we're going to zoom up here. We can see the little, it might be hard to see on the video, but there's little, like a pixel grids, tiny little squares right here, and that can kind of help when it comes to creating your designs. So I'm just going to choose like right around here, left click, hold shift, and shift allows you to do perfect up and down or sideways or 45-degree angled lines. So hold shift and then come out here to a 45-degree angled line, left click, hold shift again, and then maybe we'll come out to like right around there. All right, so once you're happy with it, you might not be, but once you want to get out of this mode, hit escape twice, and then you can double click to get back into it to be able to make adjustments. So for instance, if this anchor point right here, if you click on it, notice it's blue, we want it, maybe it's too long, you can use your keyboard arrow keys, or you can use the mouse to adjust it as you deem fit, essentially. So now we're gonna get this into place. Maybe we'll scale it up by holding Shift Alt. Maybe we'll also increase the stroke. And we could choose to make it black, and that's perfectly fine. And then we could also choose, however, just to make it the same stroke right here, like default stroke. And there we go. All right, so this here is looking pretty good. This is basically centered. We could also take both of these elements, right click and choose to add auto layout. All right, so this is looking good. And now let's put the actual label. So the label next to it is going to say, I want to receive updates via email or something like that. So we'll take down, we're gonna leave the size there, but it is competing way too much for space for your eye's attention based on these form labels right here, which are arguably more important. So to reinforce that visual hierarchy, we'll just take this and change this to regular, and perhaps change it to a size of 16. So once those are lined up, notice I have, pretty good white space between this element here. There's also good white space between these elements. All right, this is looking pretty good. So once you have it where you want it, we can go ahead and take this, and really you have some decisions to make. Do you want just the checkbox to be a component in and of itself, or do you also want to have the label be a part of the component? For flexibility, you could probably choose just to use this checkbox option without this label. But I think I'm going to include both of them because I don't imagine a scenario in which there isn't a label to the right side of a checkbox. So we could take both of those and we'll right click. We can add an auto layout in between, in and of themselves. And we can also look at how these are structured here. So if we come out here, we'll choose to center that. There we go. Now this is vertically centered. It was off slightly. And then we can right click, create a component, and then also add our variants. All right. So now we'll drag this down. We'll duplicate this. Text fields will now become checkboxes. Okay. And now we can create a few different states. So this time we'll do a hover state for these. The first one will be a hover. So we'll double click into it. We'll change this to hover. All right, so on hover, the only thing that's going to change is we'll come over here and we'll change our form background. We'll detach that from the styles. We'll go ahead and grab with the color picker this color right here, and we're going to go lighter, like right around there. So that's going to be the hover state. And we can also change this, and we want to make sure we're going to add this to our style. So click plus, and we'll just do form background hover, and then create style. Double click it. Okay, it's named hover. All right, let's duplicate this, and for this one, we're going to make this one where it's actually checked in. Now by default, let's hide this. So we'll just, for the layer section, hide this one, do the same thing for this one. Now let's do the actual checked version. So we will duplicate this, and we'll just say checked for the property, double click into here. Now for this time, you may not be able to select it here. You just have to come out here and choose to turn that layer visibility on. And then finally, let's also go ahead and choose a pressed state. So we'll take this, we'll duplicate it, and we'll choose pressed. And for pressed, what we can do is simply invert the color scheme. So we can double click into here, and for form background, we're going to change it to default stroke, or not default stroke. I think maybe we could still do that. Let's see here. Yeah, let's just leave it at default stroke. And then for this, we can change this to form background. And then this is our press state. All right, so we have some work to do for the prototyping. So let's come out here to prototyping section with the first one selected. This is simply a hover. So it's not on click, it is while hovering. All right, and then while you're hovering, what's the next action that could occur? Well, I suppose it would be while pressed, or it would be this right here, the pressed variant. So we can drag this down here, and I guess it would make sense to reverse the order of these. And then this is going to be while pressed, or while pressing. All right, and then this one will be right here. It's going to go up to this one right here, which is the checked option. And this is going to be mouse up. All right, so it's pressing and then mouse up, it goes back to this state. And then if somebody clicks this, once it's been checked, it will go back to this over here. And so this is on click. All right, that was a lot of prototyping connections, but it should work. We'll see if it does. Now let's select this, make sure this is named appropriately from frame 3 to checkboxes. We'll go back to our assets. We will drag this in. All right, and let's give it a shot. Hover, click. Oh, there we go. So hover, click. You can see now it gives us a press state. We let go. It's now selected, and then we can unclick it. Very, very cool. And by the way, let's see what's happening here. Why did that? Oh, I think because we didn't refresh this, that was showing up. All right, there we go. So now, yeah, if we hit enter, escape, escape. Okay. All right. So now what we'll do is let's go ahead and add finally a button down here, and we'll create a component for that as well. So we'll go ahead, and what we could do is just double click this. I want the button to be the same size as our text field essentially. So I'll just come over there and I copy that, and I will paste it. Now, one of the things you have to be worried of is making sure that it doesn't fall into one of your frames. So I'm just taking that out there. I just drag it out, and it's not inside of one of these frames or anything like that. So now what we can do is let's take their button. Now the button, a good call to action, which is what the button is. It really needs to stand out well. So leaving it like this and styled like that would confuse people, because they might think, even if there's a label inside of it, which there will be, they might think it's some type of text field. So you want to style your elements differently from each other. So what we'll do here, instead of form background, we can change this here to default stroke. And then now we have a button that really works well. You don't have to extend it all the way out, although you can. You certainly would want to, in most cases, if it's on mobile and you don't have a lot of space, to extend it all the way out. But we're on desktop here and we have quite a bit of space, so we can just choose to push this here. And again, leaving it this large, there's nothing wrong with it either. So it's kind of a subjective preference based on the text that's inside of it. So for the text that's inside of it, this is also an important kind of like a UX idea, and that is your button copy. Never just put submit. A lot of people want to put submit or click here. You want to, your button copy should reflect what's happening when a person, or what happens or what will happen when a person submits their form or of some sort. So for us, we can just make it something like start the course. All right, so that works well. We can take our styles here, and the color, we have to make sure that we have good color contrast. I'm leaning towards white. So what we can do is we can change this to, well, we could use an existing style that we know works already. So for the form background, we could just make that color. All right, and then we'll get this centered up here pretty good with how we want it. I think I like the looks of this as is, but first we need to check that contrast. So if we go right click, plugin, Stark. Again, Stark is a plugin or extension that you can install for free. And we're going to click on check contrast. So this is actually pretty good, 4.16 to 1 ratio. That works just fine. All right, so now we're going to take both of these, right click, choose auto layout. And again, if you want to adjust the size of this and all that, let's come over here, make sure this is centered. Now we pull this out and it will adjust accordingly. I think right around here is probably pretty good. Now we're going to take it again, right click, create a component, and then a variant. So now let's go ahead and take this, drag it out. We'll drag this over here. And this is going to be button. And let's do a couple of states. Let's do a hover and then also a pressed state. So for the hover, we can choose to make this lighter. But again, we don't want to go too light to where it messes up the contrast between it. So what we can do here is let's take this and detach it and then just make it a little bit lighter. There is a stroke on it, so we can remove that as well. And if we take both of these elements and we go to check the contrast, we're still at 3.0. That was almost perfect pretty much. You wouldn't want to go too much less than that. All right, so now this is going to be named hover. And then we will duplicate this, and then we'll do a pressed state. All right, so a press state, when somebody has their finger tapped onto it, this only shows up when there's actual contact with the mouse button or somebody's left clicking or actually tapping. So this right here, let's change this to pressed. And you can really change up the design when a person's pressing on it to really let them know that this is the actual element that they intended to select. So we can come down here and make this pretty dark. Maybe right around there. And then we can add this and call this pressed background. All right. All right, so we have them all named up, pressed, hover, and default. Let's go to prototype. This will be hover. And this right here, this will be while pressing. And then when it is finished been pressing, so we'll do on mouse up, it'll go back to the original state. All right, great. It's coming along. So now what we can do is we can come and go to our assets. Notice it says frame 3, get in the habit of changing those. So we'll go back here. We'll just call this button. Go back to assets. Drag this button on. All right, I think I might want to move this a little bit closer. All right, so your call to action button are part of your form. You can really stand to separate that out more than the main elements in terms of white space, just because it's the final step, and you can give it that space. So let's go ahead and see how this works. So notice it just changes lighter when we hover our mouse over it, and then on click, it'll go back. All right. Now, sometimes I probably wouldn't really, in the course of like a normal prototype flow, I probably wouldn't advise showing this just because it's breaking the layout. But at least you can communicate with a front-end developer and tell them, they can click on that state or hit enter key and then hit escape in order to get out of it, just to see how it's styled. All right. So there we go. We're going to do a few tests now, just so you can really start to hone in your eye for form design. And then, of course, we'll do a challenge on form design.